Madam Web is directed by S.J. Clarkson and stars Dakota Johnson, Sydney Sweeney, and among others. And this is the fourth film in Sony's Spider-Man Universe that they have set up with Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and Morbius. And in this story, it deals with Cassandra Webb, who is a paramedic that pretty much, if you know from the trailers, she ends up basically seeing like these weird visions and stuff where there's a man named Ezekiel Sims going after these three younger girls, these teenage girls. And pretty much she has to protect them and save them from him. And it's pretty straightforward because it's all about them having to come together in order to survive from him. Now here's a little backstory. Now the movie, this is now the fourth film in Sony Spider-Man Universe that they, had, like I said earlier, had previously set up with Venom. And I'll be honest, like when it comes to Sony's Spider-Man films, outside of the main Spider-Man movies like the Raimi trilogy and some of the other films that feature Spider-Man, when we were getting word that there was going to be basically a new stream of spin-offs to Spider-Man from the comics that we were basically getting that were being made by Sony to get their own universe going, I'll admit that I was really interested in where it was happening, especially the first Venom movie. And you know, growing up, I also was hearing about Madam Web because I actually got introduced to Madam Web from the original 90s animated Spider-Man series. And I remember in that show it dealt with her pretty much being like a supporting character that, well, basically kind of like a anti-hero, so to speak, where she would put Spider-Man onto his own little tasks in order to, you know, have different outcomes of trying to, you know, save the universe and stuff. And I think that right there is, to me, would have probably worked as a better film because even from the idea of going into this one, it just really seemed like that character, at least from what I understand, works better in the comics with Spider-Man as a supporting character. Because when given it like its own movie, you know, it's a lot to deal with having to go in the shoes of not having Spider-Man featured. And ever since Venom has come out, it really seems that Sony has been pumping out these movies where they can't basically use Spider-Man and because of the deal they have with the MCU and stuff. So they're only just using whatever means necessary to pump out like Spider-Man movies that are spin-offs that reference Spider-Man, but also just, you know, go into doing like their own, you know, doing their own universe, which is not a bad idea on paper, but you could really tell from the trailers going into this one that it seems like there was a lot of stuff missing that I just wasn't really getting the vibe for it. And even from what I remember as a kid and watching Madam Web, it always just felt like that's a character that really needs to have Spider-Man in the front and center. And so even from the trailers to this, the only thing that got me kind of interested was they were kind of going with this whole Final Destination type of vibe where Cassandra Webb can pretty much see things in like premonition style, which can be interesting. And they looked like they were going to go like a more thriller type of approach, where it's, you know, like an evil Spider-Man going after these girls. But after applying seeing this movie, yeah, I can honestly say that this is definitely going to go down as one of the worst superhero films that I've ever seen in my life. And out of the films that Sony has done that are related to Spider-Man or whatever, it is the worst of the entire franchise of all of Sony's properties that they have made with Spider-Man or something related to Spider-Man. If I'm going to get into any kind of pros, I will have to say that in concept-wise, the idea of it pretty much being like a premonition stuff, I thought is a good idea on paper. I like the idea of it trying to basically have Cassandra being able to try to predict things and stuff, and, you know, having to have these visions that she sees, and, you know, the whole thing about her trying to go into that where she can pretty much, you know, try to change things for the outcome to have a better future can work on paper, but other than, and I'll give it credit for at least Dakota Johnson trying of as much as she can, because she at least tries to work with it as best she could with her performance-wise, but that's it. Nothing else in this movie works at all. It is everything wrong that I really can't stand with a lot of these current superhero films that are very generic. They are very just, you know, pretty much a regurgitated stuff that we've seen a lot of times before. And this is purely a movie that seems like it was made solely by Sony just to keep the rights for Spider-Man going, where they put no thought into it. And I don't really know if this is really the blame necessarily for the director, because the director, I also heard, has only worked on television stuff. So I don't really know if it's necessarily something that she was told to do when it came to, you know, the direction they were going with, as far as the action scenes, the editing choices, all kinds of stuff. But still, got to give it is. I have to work giving it to where credit is due. I mean, the director and everyone involved with this, you know, they all ended up being a film like this that Sony was putting out, and this is everything that feels flatlined to a degree. And so, to get into my cons, what do I say? Where do I start? So, already from the beginning, when the movie basically takes place, and by the way, this will have major spoilers, so for those of you who are curious, there are some stuff that I'm going to get into that's going to be major spoilers, so you've been warned. But when the movie starts, it's already set in the 70s, where you have Cassandra's mother, and this is kind of really funny the way it plays in the trailer, with her pretty much, you know, saying that she was researching spiders and stuff and all that. And already, the movie just goes at a very quick pace to where you're already jumped into where she pretty much gets betrayed by Ezekiel Sims while they're going on this research in Peru, and he kills her, or he shoots her or whatever. She ends up getting saved by this tribe that rescues her. Then she ends up having Cassandra pretty much being born right there, and then through some kind of ritual or however what happened, basically Cassandra basically gets born with the powers of the webs and stuff. And so, by the spider or whatever. But here's the thing, though, is that with this opening, with them pretty much setting up all this stuff with Cassandra's mom, we barely even know who she really is, because all she does is she's taking photographs of just spiders and stuff, and she's just doing research. And the villain, there's really nothing to him. All he does, already from the get-go, he just immediately betrays her just for power and just wants to pretty much, you know, get the spiders for himself and stuff. And it's everything that is wrong with the way you write villains that don't really have much of that really give you the very bare bones basics. And I'll get back to this scene later, because this also comes into a point where the direction that it goes with this really feels unnecessary, where we cut back to this opening scene. But before I get into that, some of my other cons, as the movie unfolds, where it's pretty much, you know, Cassandra in modern times being a paramedic and stuff, she really comes across as a very unlikable person, because there are times where even when she's trying to when she's talking to people, and especially some of the teenagers that she comes across as like very kind of a bitch in parts, and she's always thinking for herself, and you know, she's just really grumpy at times. And other than the scenes where she's, you know, interacting with like Ben Parker, played by Adam Scott and all that, I mean, there's really nothing that really latches me on to her as a character. Because as the movie also unfolds, it already immediately starts where the villain pretty much is in modern times, and he's trying to go out. He has an immediate dream or a vision of these three girls that are in their superhero suits going to try to kill him and stuff, and they kill him in his dream. And guess what? That's the only scene that we actually see them in their actual superhero, because the rest of the film, none of the girls actually put on their actual uniforms, or even Cassandra for that matter. So it makes you wonder, like, that's really false. That's really false advertising when it comes to the marketing with this, especially when you put them in the front center and seeing them all in all these spandex gear or whatever, in all their suits, which even for the suits themselves, from what I looked at, it looked like shit too, because some of the eye holes they show, like was for Julia's character, or sorry, Sydney Sweeney's character, looked really bad, because it's like, how are you supposed to hide your identity when you can fucking see your the eyes, you have like gigantic eye holes and stuff in the mask. And it's not really established, too, if these are supposed to be, in these visions, if they're supposed to be superheroes or if they're assassins or whatever. But whatever the case is, it's like they have really no morals in the dream, because they immediately just kill the guy after they, you know, throw him off a building and stuff. And the rest of it is just him going after these girls while they're in teenagers. And conveniently, they all end up together at the same place at the subway and at different parts. And it really seems like the movie's not really giving us much of a build up to really get to know much of these characters on how they come together and stuff. And that's really the biggest issue this movie feels like, is that it feels very rushed the way it goes along with the pacing, and just there's nothing really to that when we get to Cassandra having to save these girls and stuff. Even the action scenes really feel like they're hard to focus at times. And not to backtrack, but one of the other biggest issues I have with the movie is the way that there's a constant zoom ins back and forth. that really makes me feel like I'm watching those early 2000s films. And funny enough, the movie is set in 2003. But the point, but even still, that doesn't work because the movie is still trying to take itself so seriously and not being like a true kind of like throwback to those fun type of superhero films that we could have that we got in the early days. You know, like with the early Spider-Man movies and movies that may not have been really that great, but I still had fun with, like the director's cut of Daredevil and things like that. But my point is that these action scenes, they feel very like cut and dry. And they feel like this whole movie feels like I'm watching something out of a CW network, especially the CGI. When we get to some of the sequences that involve where Cassandra is having her like visions and stuff, it really feels like I'm watching something that would have been on the CW network, or if there was like a CW version of Marvel, because CW does DC shows and stuff. But it just really just seems like it is so cheaply made that this movie really doesn't have anything really latching on to me the way it plays along. And even when we get into more about learn a little bit about these three main girls, there's nothing that really sticks out because all we know is that they have family issues and that's it. And in fact, even the girls, they don't even really feel like they have any chemistry whatsoever. And the performances, it's really kind of a shame because a talented actress like Sydney Sweeney, I heard, is also good in other stuff like Euphoria and things like that. So it's not really I don't really think it's necessarily the actress to blame. It's just everything that's really wrong with the direction and writing. But it's also, you could also still say that too with the performances as well. Because some of the dialogue in this movie too also really was very cringy at times, especially in the beginning when Cassandra is like in her home and she's talking to her cat and she says, "We're both us strays or whatever need to look out for each other." I'm like, oh. And then they also do a variation of the "with great power comes great responsibility" twice in the film, and I thought that was just so like, oh, you are so trying way too hard to be clever with this. And the fact that Cassandra is trying to basically protect him and stuff, and she also makes dumb decisions by having them in the fucking forest in one scene, and then leaves, and then pretty much says, "Oh, I can't have you around because I have to go on my own little journey." And she does this like 2 times in the movie, and it's like, this is a waste of fucking time, especially later. Not to jump the gun, but there's also a scene later when she does this where she goes to where her mother died and stuff, and it literally just recalls in exposition form the same scenes that we saw from the beginning of the film, and it's like, why am I watching this? Was the movie just going on rewind to where it was supposed to be so like dumb that we just wanted that that we missed it the first time? It's just so lazy, and it's redundant too because other than the fact that we learn more about her powers, that's really it. And the fact that her mother, she pretty much was suffering from some kind of disease, but I had no feeling for it because so much of this movie just goes along with just a lot of rinse and repeat scenes where she's going on her own, and then the villain coming after them. She saves the girls, and by running into the villain and stuff, by running them over and things like that. And it's just very cookie cutter, stuff that I've seen a million times before. Not to mention, one of the other things I have to really complain about is there's really no dynamic with this villain whatsoever because Ezekiel Sims, he just feels like he's those kind of like, kind of villains that is just wanting so much power and stuff, and there's nothing really about this villain that I cared for at all. And on top of that, one of the things that I'd also had an issue with as far as the direction and some of the audio, there were some like audio issues with this movie too because there are scenes where you can clearly see him talking, or other scenes where it'll do a lot of ADR where you hear the voice like coming out of his mouth, but you're not even seeing him like in the focus. And this happens with just regular conversations. I'm like, did they have to like dub over like his voice? Did they have to dub his voice in post to basically have him do certain scenes? Because it just really feels weird. And not to mention, I didn't really care for the guy that played him either because I thought that he was very generic and came across as not really intimidating for the most part. And this is just so many things wrong with not only from the writing and direction, but everything altogether. And then when we get into the climax, it deals with them having to essentially trap the villain at this like building and stuff. And it comes really fast too, where the climax is essentially, they're on this building that's a Pepsi Cola place of all things, and the girls end up pretty much, having to trap him, and while he's fending him off and stuff, Cassandra easily beats him by just having this thing fall on him after these fireworks go off. And then somehow she becomes blind, which I know that's a big deal. I know in the comics that Madam Web's supposed to be blind at this point. That's how she gets her powers. I know that she's blind in the comics, but unless I missed something, it was just so weird that it went by so quick to where I didn't really realize what was happening, that she was going blind in that scene, because it literally just has her fall into the water and then she wakes up in the hospital. Well, even when Cassandra is able to finally use her powers to help with the girls and everything toward the end of it, it doesn't feel earned, because there's nothing really, like I was saying earlier, there's nothing really about her that really got me interested of where the movie was playing along with it. Plus, also, I find it really convenient that this climax was not only rushed, but also the villain gets really defeated easily throughout the movie, where he's either getting obliterated by explosions and stuff. He gets his ass handed to him really easy, especially toward the end. And on top of that, it just also feels weird, because it's like the guy is supposed to be going after him, but there are points in the film where he just all of a sudden randomly shows up at points to where he knows where they're at. But then other times, from what I can remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also another scene that I believe where he can't easily find where the girls are at, even though he has his hacker person look into so many possibilities. And it just shows how really bad this script really turned out to be. And from what I also heard, a little behind the scenes on that, when Dakota Johnson first signed up for the film, I read an article that said that she was essentially, when she signed up, that the script got changed after she signed on. So it almost makes you wonder if the first draft they had probably for the film was either better or worse. And one of the other things that bothered me too is a lot of the forced references that we get into this, where we get introduced to Ben Parker, that's played by Adam Scott in this. And this, I think, was something Sony got their hands on with doing a lot of interfering and stuff, where they were having like this weird 5-10 minute scene where you have Mary Parker, who's his sister-in-law, who is essentially pregnant with, as if it's pretty fucking obvious who it is, it's Peter Parker, who's going to be the baby. But I guess for legal reasons they couldn't really specify his name and stuff. But they have this whole sequence that involves where she's having this guess the baby's name and whatever, and it just really feels like I'm watching a really different movie, and I'm watching one of those kind of like a pilot episode to a Marvel show that you would see on Disney Plus or whatever. It just really seems out of place, and not to mention a lot of the references they do with Spider-Man makes you really think of a better movie I could be watching. I'm like, yeah, I would like to know more of the backstory with Ben Parker and stuff, but I don't want to see it in a really shitty movie like this. And this just goes to show that there's probably a better film that hopefully, this is actually one that I actually do want to see rebooted one of these days, because for me, it seems like if I want to watch Madam Web, I'll just watch something that's I'll just watch the episodes that involve with her in the animated series. And if you're going to do it right, to me, if it was the casting I would have went with, where she's very elderly and stuff, I would have picked somebody like Jamie Lee Curtis or somebody like that, to really get you the vibe of who she is and a lot of the cool stuff that we know from where she's originally from what she is known for from the animated series and other forms of media that we know Madam Web from. But there's more I can go into detail, but there's just everything. This is everything wrong with how you don't do a superhero film. This is definitely going to be one of my worst of the year, and with that, I'm going to give the movie a flat line on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen Madam Web, and also the other films in Sony Spider-Man Universe, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.